The Baltimore Ravens appear more than interested in re-signing Ronnie Stanley, but there have been some teams that have emerged as potential competition for the star tackle. We talk about who they are, what it could mean if it's a disaster to let Ronnie Stanley walk, with the state of the Ravens offensive line. All that and more coming up next on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I am your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, and we are here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today and making Locked On Ravens a part of your day, your first listen each and every day as well. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. So in video form on YouTube, you like to watch the shows, you can subscribe over there, like the video, or if you are an audio listener, you can follow along and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. For a 5-day-a-week plus more daily Ravens shows. So news, analysis, updates, the whole 9 yards on the Baltimore Ravens. We have you covered here. Here with me today is former Baltimore Ravens wide receiver and Super Bowl champion Qadry Ismail, breaking down all of the ins and outs of pre-free agency, which I know is Q's favorite time of the offseason, speculation, which I know Q loves so much. Obviously, Q, Ravens have a couple of questions they need to answer, such as Ronnie Stanley, what does that situation look like? We'll get into that. Do they move off of Mark Andrews for some cap relief and maybe some draft capital? A lot of questions buzzing around the Baltimore Ravens right now, most definitely.
It is, and it's an interesting time because I think all teams that are good will get a sense of like, oh boy, how do we keep ourselves in a good space by having this 53-man roster and the practice squad guys in a state of relevance. Like, you play well in this league, it's a meritocracy, and you have an opportunity to get paid handsomely. And so those teams that are really strategic as far as being under the cap, this gives them that flexibility to sign some key players back and also look ahead as far as free agents and who can you add to your roster. This is the offseason. This is part of the reasons why I'm like, the speculation, this, that, because it changes at a moment's notice. You think you have it all figured out and planned out, but that's not always the case, especially when it comes to big ticket free agents and what teams really are thinking. And then if you're going to let a guy go, then that means other teams are going to be like, yes, and that's the bidding war and all the things that comes about.
And speaking of bidding wars, the Ravens hope to not have to enter one for Ronnie Stanley. We know, Q, they've been very clear, especially John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta during their press conference and media availability during the combine, that, hey, Ronnie's a guy that they want back in the building. It's very apparent. Now, there are reports on Sunday that came out, Jeremy Fowler of ESPN reporting from the combine, that the sense out of Indy is the Ravens and left tackle Ronnie Stanley can agree to terms on an extension in the coming days. He says that's hardly a slam dunk, but there's a sentiment to try to make that happen. Some inside the league are projecting the deal to land somewhere between $21 and $23 million per season. So that around, I've seen some numbers to say maybe 20 to 21, 20, maybe 22 to 23, but I think 21 to 23 is a decent number for Ronnie Stanley. Now, the length of that contract also, whether it's 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, is going to have some ability to say whether Ronnie wants to come back to Baltimore or not. But then we got some other reports as well, one of which from Mike Reese of ESPN, guy who covers the Patriots and does a really good job. He said that if the NFL scouting combine, one rival NFL executive said some of the buzz going around was the Patriots would aggressively pursue veteran Baltimore Ravens left tackle Ronnie Stanley should he make it to unrestricted free agency. And there have been other people who have said that same thing, shared that same sentiment. But not only that, Jeremy Fowler also reported that the Chiefs, the Kansas City Chiefs, if Ronnie Stanley were to make it to the open market, many around the league are loosely expecting the Chiefs to entertain Stanley's market should he get free. So obviously this can mean a couple different things, Q. One, the way to avoid all of this is Ronnie Stanley just re-signs with the Ravens before free agency starts. That takes all these conversations out of the equation. But should he and the Ravens not agree on a deal, well, all of a sudden you have teams with cap space. The Patriots have over $120 million in cap space. Maybe that could change a thing or two. And while Ronnie's like, okay, I want to come back to Baltimore, let's see if it can work, the Patriots come calling with $5 million more average annual value, maybe he says, well, I might have to go over here now.
Yeah, money talks. Money tells you what your worth is as far as in the eyes of general managers, teams, ownership, all that. And when you get to the point where Ronnie gets to, where he played the entire year, he was dominant the entire year, you put yourself in a position of leverage. And he showed up each week. And now this is the opportunity for him to see what my true value is on the market if, in fact, the Ravens can't get a deal done. And some would say, well, you're a veteran in the league. You had a massive deal. You got paid. What is it now that you're seeking? In other words, are the Patriots going to be bottom dwellers and you're kind of sitting there and you're probably never going to really see that fullness of the contract? And now you're frustrated that, man, I could have been on a team that's a perennial playoff contender. And, there's talks of Super Bowl opportunities, or am I going to get just paid and be satisfied with getting paid? Those are decisions, personal decisions that guys weigh all the time. And what phase of their career they're in? Are they in the phase where they're like, yo, I feel really, really good that we're going to win a championship. I'm staying. I'm going to take a little less. Or mother of pearl. I got to go. I know that I'm trying to get as much as I can and get that generational wealth to continue to keep on piling up. And that's the good part of being a good player. You got those options that sometimes other players don't necessarily have.
The Chiefs, Q. The Chiefs. Could you imagine if Ronnie goes to the Chiefs? I don't know if I could handle that personally. I think my heart could not handle that. For somebody who has meant so much to the organization, who obviously has had years and years of successful football, that's the team you're trying to beat. That's the team you're trying to get over. And your star tackle going over to Kansas City, who does, by the way, need offensive line help. Now, they just franchise tagged Trey Smith, and there's going to be a lot of questions about, okay, how is that money going to work, especially if that deal for Ronnie does come in. Let's just give it a broad range of 20 to 25 million per season. Man, I think that if you're talking about like disaster, worst case scenarios, it would definitely be losing Ronnie. I mean, Q, I can't think of a worse way the offseason could start off if that were to happen.
I mean, I think from a fan base perspective, yeah, you look at it. I mean, you go back to, gosh, I'm drawing a blank on his name, tackle. He actually went from us over to Kansas City a couple of years back, actually won himself a championship, and then he kind of kept on getting greedy, and he wound up getting shipped off to Cincinnati.
Orlando Brown.
Thank you. Orlando Brown Jr. Whew. Okay, my brain is going. Orlando Brown Jr., he went to Kansas City and upgraded that team and did what he did. And, it's all different. Heck, I mean, you go back to Darrelle Revis when he was with the Jets, and, the Jets were playing these weird games with him, and he wound up winning a championship with the New England Patriots. We've seen this. This isn't like some unique situation for Ronnie. If, in fact, he does sign with the Kansas City Chiefs. It's your broader scope out of the division current day rival that you're looking at, and they're the measuring stick that you're trying to get to and surpass. And for him to go, it would be somewhat of a little bit of a sting for the Raven flock.
And I think too, the thing that I mentioned earlier, just about the length of the deal, because who knows what money amount the Ravens or whatever other team will have to offer here. But length could also play a factor, because what Ronnie did last season was, one, he helped the Ravens out last season by chopping that last year off of his deal, but effectively bet on himself. And probably best case scenario, based off all the factors you mentioned, Q was healthy, put together a good season. He has an opportunity now to, I think, cash in with one more big major contract. And so for him, he might be thinking, look, I want to try to get as many years as I can out of this thing. If it's a 4-year deal for 20 to 25 million average annual value, that's a really good final contract for Ronnie. Now, maybe the Ravens don't want to go 4 years. Maybe they'd want to go 2 or 3. Obviously, a 1-year deal doesn't make sense because you can't spread the cap hit out. You want to have it be a multi-year deal. But a team like the Patriots we're looking for veteran offensive line leaders. Ronnie obviously has been in big playoff locker rooms, big moments as well. That's something the Ravens obviously value, but a young team like New England could say, hey, we really want you on our team here. And for a team that has that much cap space, if it's a bidding war that ends up happening, the Ravens only have so much that they can do in that scenario. And plus, they're going to have to find some creative ways to clear some cap here. It's not like they don't have any money, but they're going to have to find some ways to clear it. I mean, do you feel like this is a deal that the Ravens need to get done before free agency or he walks?
I think so, because honestly, if it does get to free agency and he does, have the other suitors talking to him and it's some massive money, and the Ravens are going to have to either say, okay, we're going to have to really figure things out for ourselves, or we're going to have to let him walk. And we're going to have to hope that we got, enough young talent on the roster, plus whomever might be in the draft to kind of help offset a huge loss, leadership wise across that offensive line. He and Lamar Jackson, really super close as far as, in the locker room, some of the conversations that they've had, and, just all that, it all factors in. But again, that dollar bill, once you're done, the team is going to be like, yeah, you're not going to see the whole thing. You're done. So that, yeah, I got to maximize my value, my dollars as best I can, because I know that my day is going to come where it's not going to be where I can just do what I want to do. And so that's the challenge at hand.
There is a lot of money waiting for Ronnie Stanley one way or the other. And again, it's up to him to decide, does he want to wait for free agency and see what his market actually is? And we know, Q, it's a booming offensive line market. It has been now for really however many years you want to go back. Or does the continued legacy in Baltimore matter, playing for one team matter, the connections he's made? And again, whatever route he decides to go, completely his decision. I'm not going to blame him for picking one side or the other, whatever he wants to have his career turn into. That's completely his decision. But for the Ravens, it could have a bunch of trickle-down effects. So coming up in the second part of the show, we'll bring the entire offensive line into our conversation about Ronnie Stanley. So stay tuned. Lots to get to on the show. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get internet than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on the fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make everyone more. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Back here on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher, Qadry Ismail, still talking Ravens football with you here, talking Ronnie Stanley again. Seems like the expectation is that Ronnie Stanley does come back to Baltimore, but it's not a slam dunk, not a done deal. And we'll see, because if he does hit the open market, there are going to be multiple suitors that would want Ronnie Stanley as a member of their offensive line. And, these things always happen where this episode will come out and then like 2 hours later, Ronnie will resign with the Ravens. It's just how the sports world works. I'm telling you, it's how it goes. But let's continue the conversation. We started off in the first part of the show. You talked about how you probably believe that the Ravens should re-sign Ronnie before free agency, or else there's a pretty decent chance he walks. Well, just how big of a disaster would it be if Ronnie Stanley does leave, given the state of the Ravens offensive line now, which does have some good pieces, but they'd have to find a way to get that production back, whether it be from a veteran on the market or maybe a go to the draft again?
I think if you look at the way this offense is run, especially from an offensive line standpoint, it's a very intricate system, not necessarily complex, but it has some intricacies into it. And you definitely need to have a strong anchor, along that offensive line, especially at left tackle. That's the anchor point when you look at your quarterback, who is a right-handed, quarterback. But there's a lot of RPO action. There's a lot of different screen type action. There's a lot of just identifying who's who across the defensive front and being able to handle the different run block schemes, inside zone, just plain old power, a lot of dual action. Those things require an offensive lineman who has, some good cerebral mindset plus, that football IQ of toughness. And Ronnie Stanley clearly checks all those boxes off. I think that's where the challenge comes in, whether it be, if you think that, Roger Rosengarten can go over to the left side, if you think, he and Andrew Voorhees will be able to kind of team up and be solid. Who knows as far as what, their plans are for McCary and, all that. I mean, that now you okay. So what does it look like for, the right side of the line and who's going to go against or who goes to that right side as far as opposite of Dane Faalele. It's that type of unknown uncertainty. And of course, the draft process is going to be the draft process. And I'd really, I hadn't looked deep into, the tackle market, but I'd be curious to see what veteran is out there that would be somebody that would fit the mold for the Ravens if, in fact, Ronnie Stanley decides to take his services elsewhere.
Well, let me give you some names. I have some of the free agents that could potentially be an option. So Ronnie Stanley is the number one free agent on a lot of people's boards in terms of tackles. Well, Cam Robinson, who went over to Minnesota, he's number two. Obviously, he was a former Jacksonville guy, and he's someone that had a 95.1 pass blocking efficiency rating this year. And that was the worst mark of his career. But if anything, this PFF says here, it could be a testament to his play over the past 4 seasons. You also have guys like Tyron Smith, who is a veteran player at this point, but we know the track record there. Maybe that's a short-term option you'd want to invest in. You then have guys like Lamar Jackson, who's already off the board. So guys are already getting re-signed. Dan Moore from the Steelers. You could bring back Morgan Moses. What a story that would be. Morgan Moses comes back and is your right tackle, maybe a flip. Roger Rosengarten over to the left side. Jedrick Wills, Cleveland Browns former first-round pick, is an option there. Do any of those names appeal to you, or at least could offset the money that Ronnie gets as a replacement option? Or do you think it might be just Ronnie Stanley or bust with the vets?
Ronnie Stanley or bust. I mean, none of those names really stand off the page and like, wow, oh yeah, we get this guy. All right, Ronnie, I know you got to go do your thing. But yeah, this is for all the reasons I've mentioned, as far as even, with the locker room, especially, I just think that, for him and what he does and his effect on the team, Ronnie Stanley or bust.
I'm with you. I'm definitely with you. Now, you can always go back to the draft. There are a bunch of tackle prospects in this class that could fill in really nicely. But the reality with that option, Q, is that Roger Rosengarten's rookie season for linemen just don't grow on trees. Roger Rosengarten was a example of a player that stepped in immediately, was rock solid for the most part, had some growing pains early, but look, that's to be expected at times. I thought that Roger was awesome. And you just can't expect every first, second, third round tackle you bring in to have that level of production. Certainly they could find a guy like that again, but that is more of a risky option considering you want to maybe move Roger over, get a rookie tackle in that way. It might be the route they have to go if Ronnie doesn't come back, but I do just want to maybe temper expectations with that, because while Roger was awesome, that is more of the exception to the rule, not the rule itself.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it comes down to what you see EDC from a scouting aspect of things. And, I think part of Roger Rosengarten, he had some really good tutelage throughout high school into college. And so into the pros, he was a seasoned guy as far as understanding some of the pro techniques and language that really helps, an offensive lineman be successful. You got to find another guy like that. And that's where you're going to be looking as far as the offensive line and, the talent, or a situation where from an offensive lineman aspect, is he, a vet that can tutor a young guy, and that young guy finally kind of just steps in. And those are all questions that, again, the speculation part of it all. And you're hoping that there's some hidden gem out there that's going to really be able to help you.
Yeah, and again, it will depend on whether Ronnie does come back or not. Again, if Ronnie comes back, you don't have to take a tackle in the first round or second round. You're not as forced into that. Whereas if he doesn't come back and you don't sign a veteran, well, unless you want to re-sign Josh Jones and put him out there at tackle, or bring McCary back and put him out there at tackle, you're probably going to have to take a guy higher up, which again isn't a bad scenario. It's just a matter of the expectation level. I think Roger Rosengarten in his season, which was exceptional for a rookie, unreal. You hope that can be what happens again, but it is not guaranteed that it happens again. And also, I just want to make it clear, it's not guaranteed for anything. If Ronnie comes back, it's not a guarantee he continues to play at that level. There's a possibility maybe he gets worse, maybe he gets better. Maybe for a veteran, that guy might not be the same vet that you saw last season. It's just there are all these guessing games. Because again, it's Q's favorite part of the offseason. So that's why we talk about it with him here on Locked On Ravens. But Q, the offensive line conversation is so intriguing for the Ravens in particular because of their quarterback in Lamar Jackson, who we know is such a dynamic player who has gotten out of plenty of sacks and has made guys miss and extended time in the pocket and whatnot. We saw the Ravens offensive line, at least according to a couple of different metrics, ESPN, pass block and run block win rates, and a couple others, had top 5 seasons in a lot of different categories. You had guys like Stanley, Rosengarten, Linderbaum, etc., all rating in the top of those categories, or at least top 5, top 10. But then there's the other side of that conversation. Well, Lamar Jackson does alleviate some of that pressure because of his ability, and so sack numbers might be lower than a non-mobile quarterback because Lamar can escape those. The offensive line for the Ravens wasn't bad last season, right? Wasn't bad, but I think there were moments that you thought, especially from certain players, maybe the guard position with Daniel Falele and Patrick McCary, that could have gone a little bit better. Do you think that Lamar Jackson, it's all him and the offensive line really is like not that good and they have a lot of things they need to work out and all this, that, and the other? Or do you think that the offensive line did show you things last season and Lamar does play a factor, but hey, we also got to give those guys credit too?
I mean, you got to give the guys credit. Like, Lamar is the first guy that's going to give him credit. Derrick Henry, heck, he definitely going to give those guys credit. His rushing yards and the whole flow. Yeah, the misses though were great, and I think that's where we would look at from a Ravens analyst standpoint. We break down a tape and like, my God, man, you didn't block anyone on that play, Daniel Falele. Or, my God, man, what was your footwork like, Roger Rosengarten? Or, man, Pat McCary, like, oh, boy, geez, what are you doing? I think those are those plays that stick out to us, whether it be, the Kansas City game or whether it be Las Vegas game. Those are some big moments. But then you also look at the Cowboys game where it's just mauling guys, going downhill, being incredibly physical. Heck, you look at the Bills game at home. My goodness, man, they just set the tone from jump. Like you don't get a Derrick Henry into the second level and running, the third play from scrimmage, untouched for a touchdown. Like that all happens because you got great offensive line play. So there were times where it was like you're like looking sideways, like what are they doing? But shoot, all the other times they were like crushing it. And because of that, it does give Lamar Jackson an opportunity to be in the MVP conversation because now he's able to scan down the football field. He's able to put himself in great positions to make plays. He doesn't have to, just sit back in the pocket and wait for things to open up and scramble around and hope. Now he can be strategic about it, a la the Steelers game in the playoffs. It's all of that. You had an offensive line, I think, yes, again, had its overt struggles that were like, what? But the bigger global picture, they did well.
Yeah, I think that, again, there are certainly some stats that could be inflated because of Lamar Jackson, and some are, offensive line Lamar Jackson stats. But we have to give these guys credit as well. It wasn't perfect. Again, there were certain aspects, and you hit on them, that did need to get better and still do need to get better. And obviously, the Ravens will probably hold some competition at guard, whether it be Falele, Voorhees, those names that a lot of people are linking there right now. But regardless, I mean, the offensive line, I expected to be kind of like middle of the pack for the most part. We saw the struggles in the first couple weeks of the season, and I'm just like, man, is this what it's going to be? But to their credit, based off of the expectation, they were better than the expectation. Not in every single aspect, but at least based off what I was expecting from the unit, which was to lose 3 starters or bringing in an inexperienced guard, Daniel Falele, who's a tackle. I didn't expect it to go as well as it did. Roger Rosengarten, I know there were expectations for Roger if he ever got in the lineup, but it was like, okay, what do you expect from a rookie? Well, he blew his expectations out of the water. Ronnie, we talked about it. Were people expecting Ronnie to stay healthy and have the year that he had? Well, he blew those expectations out of the water too. So credit to the offensive line, but that doesn't mean that they don't need to assess some of the positions on that line and where they need to go, particularly left guard is the one. And obviously for Daniel Falele, I think he'll have a shot to win that job again in camp, but we're going to see how it all unfolds there. Coming up, though, get into a bit of a free agency preview. We'll talk about Odafe Oweh and his cryptic tweets on social media as well, and the edge position as a whole. Stay tuned, plenty to get to on Locked On Ravens. Back here, Locked On Ravens with Qadry Ismail. I am Kevin Oestreicher. Q. Free agency is less than a week away, at least the legal tampering period aspect of it, where agents and teams and players can all talk to each other, agree on some deals before the new league year starts. The Ravens don't necessarily get too involved in that for the most part. I remember you and I talked after one of their more busy starts to free agency with Marcus Williams, and they got the Morgan Moses signings. Darius Smith almost came back, although that whole thing, I know we had a whole conversation about that when it happened. But now the Ravens
all for nothing.
Yeah. Hey, Zadarius, maybe the Ravens need an edge. Maybe so they can make a move for Zadarius. But something that I'm monitoring here for the Ravens is how they approach this offseason, particularly for agency, because as we've talked about, they don't have this laundry list of guys they need to re-sign this offseason. Obviously, Ronnie's important, but other than that, your biggest free agents are Brandon Stevens, Patrick McCary, Patrick Ricard. Really feels like they can upgrade this roster without having to lose too much, assuming they do bring back Ronnie Stanley. But even if they don't, they'll have options and opportunities. The edge position is one that a lot of people are talking about right now, getting that disruptor, that game wrecker, game changer. And while Odafe Oweh, he improved last season, first double-digit sack season for Odafe last year, he put out some cryptic tweets on social media on Friday. And don't you just love it, Q? The age of social media, you run with stuff and you can put anything out there and someone will interpret it a bunch of different ways. Well, Odafe Oweh tweeted for the first time in almost 3 years. Put a peace sign as his first tweet and then put, man, I hope not, but God's plan always wins. This could mean anything, literally anything. Could be in his personal life, could be his professional football life, could be the Ravens told him something he didn't want to hear, maybe the contract number because he's obviously eligible for an extension. Whatever it is, doesn't make it any less apparent that the edge position is something the Ravens are probably going to look at this offseason. You got David Ojabo, who can't really trust right now. I expect Tavius Robinson, that your guy, to have a great year next season. But in terms of Odafe Oweh, what you expect from him and just what you expect the Ravens to do from the edge position in general, what's your overall feeling right now?
I think for Odafe, he did have the double-digit sacks. Some would say it was due to Justin Madubuike's being double-teamed, and he was able to get to the quarterback one-on-one. There was a lot of, pressure up the middle, and so it flushed his way. And you still got to make the play. So he did. There have been times, though, that he was one-on-one again, and you should have made the play, and you didn't. And so it's like, he gets there, but almost. It might be a quarterback pressure, but he should have had his eye. And that's like a rinse and repeat. Now, you talk about trying to free up cap space and re-sign players and have enough money and all those things. I think that's where, again, with Ronnie Stanley, leverage is king. Ronnie didn't have much leverage, but then he put himself in a position to have leverage. And so again, Adafe, it's a game of leverage. Do you have enough leverage? And I don't know what the cryptic tweet means. And yeah, we'll see how it does unfold. But I could see where he might have gotten some signals of saying that he might not be either A, the money might not be what we think it's going to be, or the Ravens are saying, hey, we're going to look elsewhere, either via free agency or the draft.
Yeah, and again, him with Adafe Owe and even Kyle Van Noy, those two essentially shared being the Ravens' number one pass rusher. They don't have a Myles Garrett. They don't have a Micah Parsons. So those are two guys who could maybe be available. But for the rest of free agency, Keel, I think that for Baltimore in particular, the secondary is that other position. I mentioned Brandon Stevens. Obviously, we know Marcus Williams isn't coming back. That's going to be he's not going to be on the roster come the start of free agency, or at least very soon after. But when you talk about the fact they already have Marlon Humphrey, they already have Nate Wiggins, they already have Cal Hamilton, they already have Darius Washington. I've done a couple mock drafts where the Ravens take a talented safety in the first round because the Ravens, they like to get talent and figure out the rest later, which I think is a good strategy. BPA. They could also go out there, maybe trade for a Jair Alexander, get that star quality third corner. Darius Slay just got released by Philadelphia. Could he be an option? Do you think the secondary is good as right now as it is? Do they need more star additions, or do you think that they can kind of fill out the edges and focus their assets more on other positions?
Well, from a corner standpoint, you can never have enough corners. Ozzie Newsome. So with his quote, I think you can never have enough corners. And we've seen that. We've seen it where you'll go into the season. Last season, I was like, wow, looking at that group, it's a deep group, strong group. Oh my goodness, this is something. Then all of a sudden, as the season went on, it was the worst pass off or worst defense against the pass in the league, 32nd ranked. And so did they improve upon it? Sure. But they had to move Kyle Hamilton around. They had to put in Darius Washington and get rid of Jackson, bench Marcus Williams, and then everything just kind of settled in. But that being said, I think that's where, as much as we speculate now, we could talk about it. I don't care. You gotta get some talent. You're gonna have to draft some guys, but shoot, this is again where maybe the cryptic tweet, who knows, with Adafe, they're trying to figure out, can they get a pass rusher, and can they, for example, do something like a Darius Slay, if you will. Alexander, to me, because he didn't really complete, a full season, and the last two seasons really played sparse. I wouldn't want to, even go near that as much as he is talented, because you're rolling a dice and you're going to be right back to where you started from, as far as always dealing with injuries, always trying to figure out who's who on the roster. I think you should go after, go after some awesomeness. And what I mean by that is Darius Slay, if there's an opportunity there, if the money fits, but then also look at drafting and be ready to develop some young guys.
Yeah, secondary is definitely a need for them. You have stars there, but as you said, Nazi has said, you can never have I'll never forget that 2014 season where they were one corner away from signing me to go put out there on the field because they lost everybody. Rashod Melvin was the guy that they had to sign and bring in that year, and they were down like 6 or 7 corners. And you can practice, okay, and you can never have too many corners, but sometimes you just go through years like that. So the best option, and the Ravens do have guys like TJ Tampa waiting the wings and others as well, is just go and stockpile them and hope the injury football gods do not go and make your life not so great with that position. But Q, I appreciate your time. As always, thank you for hopping on. Tell people where they can find you and what you're working on.
Yeah, missiletraining.com. Missiletraining.com is where you can interact with me as far as your human movement and sports performance training. Doesn't matter the age, from age 6 all the way up to 85. I help you move. I help you get stronger. I help you be durable. I help you have a stronger understanding of how to maintain your body's optimal way to move. At the same time, you can also find me on WJZ with all the different purple shows, especially purple pregame during the season. But each and every week, Locked On Ravens that's the spot. Tune in, check it out. Me, Kevin Oestreicher, we sit back and we talk shop like you heard today.
Absolutely. Q's are every single week, so be sure to, first of all, go and check out all of Q's work. Visit missiletraining.com. He knows his stuff. And then also keep it locked in here on Locked On Ravens. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Q, thank you again for hopping on, and thank you to everybody who watched and listened to today's episode. Be sure to subscribe in video form and subscribe in audio form for 5 days per week of daily Ravens coverage. Coming up tomorrow, more Ravens talk as we continue to get closer and closer to free agency. So be sure to stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.